This is Smarter Cars, a podcast about autonomous vehicles.
This is the finish line. The Stanford racing team has made its way into the history books.
But the most important thing for me is it actually doesn't matter who comes first. It matters that we as a community achieve it.
Early in a technology, 1,000 flowers should bloom.
Welcome to Smarter Cars. This is your host, Michelle Kairouz. In this episode, we talk with Darton Ito, the Deputy Director of Innovation at San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. Darton has been with SFMTA since 1998, working on transportation planning and innovation policy. Darton, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You are the Deputy Director for Innovation at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, SFMTA. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at SFMTA and what you do?
Sure. So the role of innovation here at SFMTA is a relatively new office that was created about a year ago when the Department of Transportation launched their Smart City Challenge. So when that opportunity came up, it was recognized that the existing structure that we had here there wasn't a place for that type of effort to live, and so the Office of Innovation was created to lead that Smart City Challenge, and that proposal that San Francisco put together had 16 different elements, and some of which included autonomous vehicles of various sorts, whether they be more shuttles or working with private sector providers. And so from there, that was kind of the genesis of the Office of Innovation. And as we've seen at the federal and the state level, there have been some actions to figure out how to manage autonomous vehicles from a safety and testing perspective. And so part of my role is to review that legislation or proposed rules or policies and ensure that the city's interests are captured within those proposals.
Terrific. So as you mentioned, we saw last year at the federal level, NHTSA issued some guidance and set up a safety assessment process it would like manufacturers to go through before testing or deploying autonomous vehicles. And then here in California, the legislature enacted a statute in 2012, and the California DMV originally implemented some regulations about autonomous vehicles in 2014, and they're in the process of updating those regulations this year. So we have federal and state rules governing autonomous vehicles, and what we'd like to discuss today is the role of cities like San Francisco. And so I'd like to start by asking you more broadly what you see as the potential benefits and the potential challenges of autonomous vehicles in a city like San Francisco.
Well, I think, the thing that we start with in San Francisco is safety. San Francisco is one of the cities that has adopted as a Vision Zero policy goal. Our goal is to eliminate traffic-related deaths by 2024, which is only a few years out. And so, one of the promises of autonomous vehicles is that they will help to remove some of the human error that results in collisions and in too many cases traffic deaths. And so that's one of the benefits that we can see autonomous vehicles having. And then after that, it really depends upon whether these vehicles are simply replacing the private automobiles, kind of one for one, as we're seeing today, or whether it opens up new transportation options or a new way of people moving around, perhaps, reducing the number of cars that are, within the city or operating within the city, more sharing, higher occupancy of those, which would then help us to achieve some of our other goals, which is, reducing single occupancy auto trips, decreasing the impacts the transportation sector has upon the environment, and things like that.
I read the piece that the National League of Cities put out on sort of how cities can prepare for autonomous vehicles, and it talked about the need for cities and regional transit authorities to work together to think about how autonomous vehicles might affect public transit going forward. And I just wanted to ask, what is San Francisco doing to think about sort of this long-term planning? As you point out, a lot of the benefits of autonomous vehicles might be best achieved if they're facilitating sharing or other types of transit. And I'm just wondering what San Francisco is doing along those lines.
Well, there's, but I think at this point there's more questions than there are answers or solutions. It's yet to see how autonomous vehicles could most effectively support the transit network. In San Francisco, we've built up the public transit system over the past 100 years, a very significant investment by the public and government in developing a pretty robust transit network that's able to transport a large number of people efficiently, and simply trying to move all of those people into autonomous cars, for example, would gridlock the streets, even with really complex algorithms to maximize use of every alleyway and space. So there's a lot of questions about how those vehicles can help supplement, complement, reach those harder to reach areas, provide mobility for people that may not be able to use transit, but the public transit network that we have today. We're partnering with our sister agency, the Transportation Authority, who are managing the mobility of Treasure Island, which is a newly developing neighborhood that's on an island that's about halfway between San Francisco and Oakland. And part of that mobility management plan is to have an on-island circulator shuttle to help people get to and from the regional transit, which would be ferry and bus service on and off the island. Also internal circulation to any of the retail or places within the island. And so originally, when the development was proposed, I think these were going to be traditional shuttle vans that would have a human operator. But now we have a grant to do a pilot to explore the use of an autonomous shuttle, which could have the benefits of allowing us to have more frequent service or longer spans of service for the same dollars that a more traditionally operated shuttle of that nature would have. So that's probably our first foray into autonomous vehicles is transit-like publicly operated service.
Sure. And, San Francisco unfortunately didn't win the Smart Cities challenge, but I know you guys did a lot of work in thinking about some pilot programs and tests and things that could be done in different neighborhoods. Are you thinking about moving forward with that kind of testing in order to start to explore things, as you mentioned, like the outer neighborhoods where perhaps it would be more efficient to use something like rideshare than to continue to run bus routes that, that might not be profitable or that kind of trial?
At this time, we haven't identified anything beyond the Treasure Island pilot. I think that there's certainly opportunities and some planning and analysis that we'd want to do to kind of understand where those opportunities may lie, but we don't have any specific proposals at this time or things that we're actively exploring.
Okay, so the the California DMV proposal to update their autonomous vehicle regulations, I think the most recent draft of those regulations came out in March, and a number of cities and folks in the industry submitted public comments on those regulations, including SFMTA. And so I wanted to ask you about a couple of those topics and get some of your thoughts there. So first, the proposed rules require manufacturers to notify and coordinate with cities or other localities before testing driverless cars in your jurisdiction. I think it's not really clear what that notification or coordination would entail, but I know SFMTA in your public comments stated that you thought cities should be notified in advance of testing and or deployment of autonomous vehicles, and that cities should retain the power to deny testing on city streets and designate sort of where and when testing can occur. And so if San Francisco has that power, sort of how would you propose to evaluate requests for testing? Where and when would you think sort of testing would be appropriate, or what kinds of limits do you think the city would be interested in seeing as testing proposals are put forward?
Well, I think, harkening back to the NHTSA policy guidelines, they had the 15-point safety assessment, and I think, in the California DMV's proposed regulations, that they referenced that as well. And so I think, that's a starting point for, demonstrating that the manufacturer has thought about the potential safety implications of testing the vehicles on public streets. I think the thing that we're concerned about here, one thing that we're concerned about here in San Francisco is that we have a pretty dynamic environment where there's a lot of changes to city streets, whether there be for temporary events or construction. And so, making sure that there's engagement and knowledge of what the vehicle is likely to encounter out there, and that the manufacturer has thought about those things in advance and has plans for how the vehicle would react in different situations that may not be what it was expecting to see out there on city streets. So that's one example of the type of thing that, I think that there's more conversation between the vehicle manufacturers and cities about how best to communicate those kind of the dynamic nature of city streets. There's also, we've been pretty proactive in trying to identify, different ways of approaching safety particularly for bicyclists and pedestrians. And so, there's a lot of unique street markings, the green bike lanes, and ways to convey to vehicle operators to be aware that a bicyclist or a pedestrian may be in this location. And so ensuring that these autonomous vehicles are able to really understand the nuances of this range of traffic control and signaling the potential for other road users is something that we're really interested in working with the manufacturers to make sure that they're understanding how to navigate those as well.
Sure. And so you mentioned safety, so let's talk a little bit about that. I think, as you mentioned, NHTSA came out with its guidance, which is voluntary for the industry to comply with. I think the California rules are interested in making that perhaps mandatory for folks who are going to test and deploy in California, which I guess is a subject of some debate in the comments to those rules. But NHTSA does have this 15-point assessment and generally has been charged with safety of motor vehicles historically. The way that NHTSA has always regulated automobiles is using a self-certification method where the company will certify that its cars meet a certain standard. But we don't have government pre-approval or third-party testing where General Motors or someone has to sort of prove that their car meets all the federal motor vehicle safety standards. Instead, in this country, we've always had self-certification by the industry, and then NHTSA has the ability to recall, and there's tort liability and other remedies if for some reason the vehicle doesn't meet those standards. I think in the California regulations, there was some discussion with the DMV initially about whether the DMV in California might take a different approach and might require some sort of third-party testing in order to offer the safety assurance that you referred to before cars were tested or deployed on California streets. And I think California, ultimately the DMV decided against that approach and continued with the self-certification approach that's been the standard in the industry. I think the SFMTA, in your comments, disagreed with that and thought perhaps there should be safety benchmarks and third-party testing or some sort of external validation that safety benchmarks are being met. Can you talk a little bit about your views on that?
This is something that I think is probably, an evolving conversation, with the limited number of miles that these vehicles have operated, right now a really small, amount of experience to know, what are the larger implications as these start to be deployed further. And so I think, there may come a time where the self-certification by the industry may not be enough. It's possible that there's things that we can't foresee that we need a little bit stronger approach than maybe we've taken in the past. But I think our comments were expressing to keep that discussion alive rather than just kind of defaulting to the approaches to the motor vehicle industry that have occurred in the past.
Yeah, I think the DMV in its initial statement of reasons for the most recent draft of the regulations had basically come out and said that there was an inability to formulate a pass-fail criteria that would be used for third-party testers, and so they were concerned about anomalous results and that it wouldn't sort of uniformly determine the safe operation of autonomous vehicles. And so I think that was the basis for them backing off from that approach in the California regulations. I guess we'll see where NHTSA ends up on it, but for the moment, I think NHTSA's sticking with self-certification. With respect to testing in the city, in addition to these concerns about safety and the ability of autonomous vehicles to react to pedestrians and bicyclists, are there other limits in terms of geography or time of day or other things that you are anticipating in terms of testing of autonomous vehicles, especially ones where there's not even a safety driver in the car? It's just a car without a driver, I think, is how the regulations are set up.
Well, I think like would happen in any city, there's different environmental conditions or different weather patterns. San Francisco is famous for its fog, so low-lying clouds and things like that. How do you navigate that? Perhaps these autonomous vehicles would do a much better job than us humans. So that's maybe one of the more unique parts here, us in London and a few other places. But I think that I guess the operating domain that the manufacturers or the AV manufacturers are establishing need to account for all those various conditions: rain, fog, different lighting conditions and other things as well. And I think that section there of the proposed regulations, as long as it's a very clear and consistent application of those terms across the industry, would help to address a lot of those situations.
Right. So you're referring to the operational design domain. I think the California rules want to make sure the manufacturer has, tested the autonomous vehicle under controlled conditions that simulate these operational design domains that the vehicles are intended to operate in. I think the SFMTA in its comments mentioned that you would like to see these standard definitions of the operational design domains, as you were just mentioning, including something called urban multimodal environment. What do you think that kind of an operational design domain would include? Like, what are the things you're concerned about there?
A lot of that has to do with, there's a lot more complex movements, often at a lower operating speed. Reaction times, are reduced in terms of the number of different situations that the vehicle could encounter. So, recognizing that once you leave a highway, freeway, or even or higher speed arterial network, that once you get into an urban environment, that there's a lot more factors that come into play, a lot more moving pieces, and that the vehicles have been tested and are able to safely operate in those situations. I think one of the things that I recall we mentioned in here in the letter itself was something that NACTO had recommended, which was setting a maximum speed for autonomous vehicles in urban environments. Kind of going back to the safety goal. Reducing speeds also reduce the severity of any collisions that may occur.
Yeah, I noticed that and was thinking, the maximum operating speed of 25 miles per hour in the city, which I think is what NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, has suggested. I can kind of see that going both ways. Why 25 miles an hour as opposed to the speed limit? I guess I'm a little concerned. There are certainly parts of San Francisco where the speed limit might be much higher, like 40 miles per hour. And so is it more of a safety hazard to have the car going too slowly, or how would you manage that aspect of it?
I think like I said before, it goes back to the idea that, it's a safer speed, reduces the potential for, fatal collisions and other things. So, that's just an example of the type of aspect that we would like to see included. That the exact miles per hour is probably up for debate, but it's some acknowledgement that you're in a different environment and that there may be different requirements or limitations on the operation of the vehicles when you're in a complex urban environment.
They have to recognize cable cars, I guess, in San Francisco. Be a little different.
Cable cars, cable car tracks, turnarounds, and everything else.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think NACTO's comments also suggested, and this might have been at the federal level, the question of whether level 3 autonomous vehicles should be allowed in these complex urban environments as opposed to a level 4 or level 5 vehicle, given the necessity of a human driver taking back control with level 3 and some of the dangers around people misusing that type of technology. Do you have a view on whether level 3 should be allowed in a downtown urban environment?
I don't think that our agency has come up with an official statement on that, but I think that there is a big difference between, levels 3 and below and levels 4 and 5. And, personally, I would have concerns with, levels three and below, because there's an acknowledgement that the human operator should be ready to intervene or take control at any moment. And from my perspective, I think that that's again reintroducing the human element that a lot of the hope for autonomous vehicles is trying to eliminate.
Right. So the California regulations are going to be addressed only to cars and not to larger commercial vehicles like trucks and buses. So testing and deployment will be allowed in the state of California if these rules are adopted for automobiles, but not for, say, trucks over 10,000 pounds. But there is the concept of commercial use of autonomous vehicles, even setting aside sort of the big trucks, just looking at automobiles. It seemed like the SFMTA was concerned in its comments about commercial use of autonomous vehicles and noted that cities should issue some additional regulations pertaining specifically to commercial operation. Can you tell us a little bit about what commercial services you have in mind and what kinds of additional regulations you think cities might be interested in?
Well, in that respect, a lot of the commercial applications that we were referring to are things like the TNCs. So, if you're using autonomous vehicles to provide trips in cars, again, getting back to our overall goals of, reducing the amount of vehicle travel, congestion, and related things to that there needs to be some thought about the commercial application of autonomous vehicles. How do we ensure that they're being utilized in a way that is not significantly increasing the number of vehicle miles traveled, that we don't have a large increase in the dreaded zero occupant vehicles. A lot of that comment was to put a placeholder on the discussion that the commercial application has some unique aspects that cities would like to weigh in on and have a discussion with the DMV and the manufacturers, or even some of the potential service providers in that case.
Right. What kinds of things do you think? I think people see this today with rideshare, with human drivers also, the question around how do passengers get in and out of the vehicles, and how does traffic flow get affected by that? Are there any thoughts that you have as to how, with autonomous vehicles, perhaps making more trips or doing more rideshare, how the city streets could be better utilized to accommodate that? It sounds like you want to encourage rideshare and carpooling and multiple uses of vehicles rather than individual car ownership. How do you think the streets can work to facilitate that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've started to talk about, what we're calling the bulge. There's going to be this transitionary period where there'll start to be this additional capacity to move people, perhaps through autonomous vehicles in the near future. Today, more from other services. But how do we accommodate that transition while a large number of people still own a private automobile and you haven't yet transitioned into, reducing auto ownership and relying more on mobility services in the future. And so, there's kind of a caution about rushing to reimagine the city streetscape to, facilitate an autonomous vehicle future, because there will be inevitably a long transition period. Questions that are often raised in discussions around the topic are, will we have autonomous vehicle dedicated streets and things like that? And, it seems like there'll be a fairly large transition period, where, we're not going to be able to just convert a city over to the autonomous vehicle only. I think some of the more interesting things from our perspective are the impacts that it'll have on parking, both, within buildings, potential for reusing space on city streets, allowing more space for pedestrians, bicyclists, other things, reducing the need for on-street parking, which could be repurposed for pickup and drop-offs of a large range of types of vehicles or mobility services. So, I think that there's a lot to be thought through on the land use side, especially since a lot of the changes or the bones of what we have to work with are in place. And so making significant changes to those cost a lot of money and take a lot of time and need to be approached from a pretty thoughtful way.
Yeah. Are you guys seeing an impact already with respect to parking garages from the use of rideshare? I know anecdotally, I park downtown and the parking garages are, much less busy than they ever were. It's pretty easy to get a spot. And I can only assume that's in part because people who live in the city are finding it economically beneficial to use rideshare to get to work. Are you guys seeing an impact in the parking garages?
That's something that I don't personally know if we've seen reduction in use of garages. There's a number of public parking garages that MTA manages, that are city run, but there's a whole lot more parking spaces that are privately, on private property, and so those we probably have less of an idea, but certainly we would be able to monitor the impact on the public garages over time. An interesting thing about, kind of this shift, if that shift really is occurring, is that, a good portion of the parking revenues that the city receives are actually helping to support the robust transit network. So one thing that we have to keep our eye on is, how changing travel patterns and the use of the city's parking assets change over time, and how we can continue to provide the transportation system that we have if those revenues start to drop off.
Yeah, let's talk about pricing. The SFMTA and its comments, the DMV, and I think NACTO also mentioned that cities want to retain the ability to make additional rules governing autonomous vehicles, and in particular to retain the ability to price access to city streets. How do you think that might look? Are you thinking like a vehicle miles traveled tax, or charging for curb access, congestion pricing? Like, what are the ways that this city might price access to city streets?
Well, at this time, I don't think that San Francisco has decided or has settled on a particular method for that, but we've identified the goals that we're trying to achieve, and that's to reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled, reduce auto ownership rates, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other emissions from automobiles or the transportation vehicles. So, it from my perspective, it could be a mixture of incentives that help us to achieve those goals, and then also fees of some sort for those that want to do something different. And creating a way to then have a pool of funding to help kind of create that virtuous cycle of helping us to achieve our overall city goals from that perspective.
It's interesting because when people talk about, taxing autonomous vehicles, which I think in large part are going to be electric, it kind of seems backwards, right? Like if someone's going to, give up individual ownership and you're going to have ride sharing or carpooling with autonomous vehicles serving, multiple people as opposed to individual cars driving downtown, it seems like you'd want to incentivize that behavior, especially if it's in an electric vehicle. So it always seems a little backwards to me to think about taxing the autonomous vehicle. It's almost like you want to tax the old gasoline vehicle with one person in it rather than the rideshare vehicle that's electric.
Yeah, I think that looking at one mode of travel is probably limiting, and wouldn't necessarily address the overall challenges that we face in providing a safe, environmentally sound transportation system as a whole. But that in reference back to this comment, since it was specifically on autonomous vehicles, we want that to be part of the conversation. May not be the full solution on its own, but could be part of a larger discussion on how do we achieve these pretty ambitious goals that the city and the state have, particularly around greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. How are you engaging with industry on some of these discussions and issues? Is the city going to have some sort of a committee, or are you just kind of participating in one-off discussions with industry players about these various issues? We've had some discussions, with particular, AV manufacturers. We haven't settled on kind of a forum approach. I think a lot of it is, just keeping abreast of what is happening. I think, part of our comments were reflective of, making sure that the reports that the AV testing reports are made available, that they're easy to use, that we can start to look at things like the disengagements or collisions and kind of understand what challenges the vehicles are facing, and perhaps there are opportunities for the city to help in some of those cases. Right. You mentioned the disengagement reporting. California has had disengagement reporting for a number of years now with the current regulations. I think the proposed new rules have some additional requirements. It sounded like SFMTA supports a little more detailed disengagement reporting, including the specific address where the disengagement happens. What do you hope to learn from this additional detailed reporting? I know the industry has expressed some concern about privacy and also around confidential, business secrets being a little bit too exposed with that level of granularity. What does the city hope to learn from additional detailed reporting?
I think, it goes back to the complex nature of city like San Francisco, where one end of the block can be very different than the other. That just a general vicinity or even block face may not be enough to really understand what the challenge was, or what was influencing the disengagement to happen. So a lot of it has to do with understanding what a better sense of what the vehicle was experiencing when those disengagements happened, and over time, perhaps there's patterns that start to develop. That then again, there may be a role for the city to work with the manufacturers and the testers of these vehicles to address.
Great. And, I know there's been some concern in the industry about disengagements, how they're reported, and whether it really presents a true picture of what's going on with the vehicle, and perhaps some planned disengagements versus disengagements to prevent an accident. There's different definitions that have been proposed. Do you have a thought on how disengagement reporting might be more useful? Are you concerned about the noise in the data?
That's an interesting question that personally I hadn't contemplated before. From our perspective, I think it would be more useful to know when there's the unplanned disengagements. If there are certain situations where just by routine, whatever procedures the tester has in place to disengage at certain locations or times a day or whatever it is, those are probably less useful, and like you said, could create some noise in the data. I think at this point, again, there aren't within individual cities yet, there aren't like a large number of reports to really start to see what kind of patterns there may be, but that'll change over time as more and more vehicle miles are traveled, and we'll see how that evolves over time.
Are there any other issues that we haven't touched on in particular that SFMTA is concerned about or would like to see the industry address going forward as you work together?
One of the things that always comes into play is access to the vehicles, particularly people with disabilities. We have a robust paratransit services of various types to help people that need different mobility solutions to get around the city and to their destinations. That's an area where some of the early benefits of the autonomous vehicles are that it would expand mobility for seniors, persons with disabilities, and other groups. But so far, the types of vehicles, the vehicles themselves haven't necessarily been reimagined from that perspective. And then, there's also people that may need assistance just, getting into and out of the vehicles, which when you have an operator, there's always a human there that, if they're properly trained, can assist. What happens in the future when you don't need a human operator? How do we ensure that people still have good access to mobility?
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to Darton for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. You can find our show notes for this episode and all episodes at medium.com on our publication, Smarter Cars. We look forward to seeing you next time.